So we're starting with what? With
Praise to Manjushri.
Praise to Manjushri. Obeisance to Maguru and Protector Manjushri, holds as his heart is scriptural text symbolic of all scenes or things as they are. One distinct forms unclouded by the who teaches in 60 ways with the patient love of a father of his only son. All creatures caught in the prison of samsara, in the darkness of the universe, overwhelmed by their suffering. He was described as life that arises in stupor of delusions and frees us from the whose powerful sword of wisdom hews that suffering wherever its sprites appear, clearing away the darkness of Ain Trinchu Manjushu's princely body is adorned with the 112 marks of the Buddha, who has completed the 10 stages, achieving the highest perfection of Bodhisattva, and being pure from the beginning. O Manjushu, loving one, with your grace and your wisdom, illuminate the darkness and closing my mind, enlighten my intelligence and wisdom so that I may get insight into the Buddha's words and the texts that explain them.
So we'll be doing the mandala offering in English because we're not able to chant or sing. And then Geshe can do the refuge and bodhicitta prayer, and we can just softly say along quietly to ourselves. By the virtue of offering to you, the assembly of Buddhas visualized before me, this mandala built on a base resplendent with flowers, saffron water, and incense, adorned with Mount Meru and the four continents, as well as the sun and the moon, may all sentient beings share in its good effects.
Sanye Cholan Tsogi Chonam La Chan.
Dagi Chuji Given Somingi, Roland Business, Sanji Rubarasho, Sanji Chedan Soji Chonula, Chanchu Pardo Dan Kelsu, Dagi Chuji Given Somingi, Roland Business, Sanji Rubarasho, Sanji Chedan Soji Chonula, Chanchu Pardo Dan Kelsu, Dagi Chuji Given Somingi. Roland Business, Sanji Rubarasho. Kanki Tuzini Zone, Tawa Tamji Pambicher, Tambichun, Kodam Kela Chancelo.
So it's a health advice that we cannot recite.
We cannot chant,
Yeah.
and we cannot sing, so that we can have one person supposed to be 3 meters apart.
I'm not moving.
No, we don't want you to.
Sabare.
De la Shetan Chon Maris. Kega Chon Maris. De Chawina de la Natagre in Yagodusud. So that's like COVID-19 related thing. Okay.
Satarin do Romanto Kejele.
La.
Satarin don Romanto Kejele.
So also people have to keep 3 meters away from each other?
No, if you're chanting, you have one person chanting at 3 meters from anyone else.
Okay.
But from anyone.
Dumba Duwaina, Shetan Waina, any meters soon like the Degores.
Zapemini with Rola. Yinga Yomara.
Pajanga so Jemed Medundala Jena Yagayor.
That's Garan Pilarocha.
Sorry?
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Because on the Samdi, Numbi Nimbola Beber Chavani, said Nima Lawson to Sarisra.
So we're going to go back to the text and pick up from the point that we left off in the previous session, which was in the previous module. So we're looking at chapter number 4, and we are today going to pick up from verse 43. Let's just recap where we are in looking at the outline. So chapter number 4, I'll make it slightly bigger. Guarding conscientiousness. We started the section of guarding conscientiousness with regard to the training. We've covered being conscientious about abandoning wrongdoings. Then being conscientious about abandoning the afflictions. And there were 3 main points in that section. We've covered the first one, reflecting on the disadvantages of the afflictions. And today we're going to go back to point B. It is inappropriate to feel weary of the hardships involved in abandoning the afflictions. Now, there were 3 main points in that section. And we're going to pick up from the 3rd point. It is reasonable to be diligent in the practice of destroying the afflictions. First off, one should make effort in the antidotes to the afflictions. So it's the second half of verse 42 and verse 43.
Nimbo Congores, Nimbo Comialaya, and some Nimbo and Suiba, Count Nimbo Drosage, and in Numumbi Munzendi, this will go to.
So the section says that we need to be diligent about applying an antidote to the afflictions. That being the case, first off, we need to know what is the antidote? What are the antidotes to the afflictions? To be able to recognize the way in which the antidote, the afflictions, it is crucial that we identify those antidotes before we proceed with being diligent about them.
Masho chingi, sem maron chingi, lojilaya, and Numung Shago dosra, sem maron chesla, the penataji Chadang Davina, sem mashiva, mus chig dosra, on the sempe and Karswataji, sem magiva songi, sem monchungi, sem tene, samsale, drum machungi. And shoot chishu the Chadang Chigoros. In the Chadang Zawadi, Maribati, the Num big Zawadi, Mariba said, Mombati, Mumbi Wangi, and it Sam Maro, Chiriabata, Severes, Tinza, and it come the Numbi, Nimble and Bebsi, Numudi, Zudi, Num with Zawa, and it Danzin Maribale shot, and D Nimbodi. Conans Dangosunga, Damito, Sherele, Shachin, Gundi, Dame was another, Nil Teconani Tobalaya, Bevachino, and Numu Minibola and Bevachagoros.
And also, in order to apply an antidote to the afflictions, we need to also know what afflictions are. So, in general, as we said before, afflictions are those states of mind which are not peaceful. They make the mind unpeaceful. They make the mind become inappropriate or crude. Such as, for example, anger and attachment. We know that anger and attachment are states of mind in which the mind is not peaceful. They directly, explicitly make the mind inappropriate, not right, in engaging its object of thought. So the root of those unpeaceful states of mind is ignorance, confusion. It is clearly the case that this is the root of the afflictions. And therefore, here when we're speaking about being diligent, about applying the antidote to the afflictions, the main point here is being diligent about applying an antidote to ignorance of grasping at the self. Now, what antidote to ignorance of grasping at the self is wisdom that realizes selflessness, that is directly contradictory to ignorance in its mode of apprehension, which means that developing wisdom of reality, of the way that things exist, is the main antidote that is to be applied in this section.
간지 뉴모비 님보디 우지 님보디 네룩 대코나니 도비기 로디 셔럽디 뉴모비 님보 차고레스 다 딘지기다 셔럽 대코나니 도비 셔럽로 셔럽기 아니 다치 냉가다 소디 다 레브 아니 고바로 고베칼이야 다 조승고라스 다 이내야 당한주 아니 답 내가 다 야슈지래야 고급 야슈지래야 티 대리네 진 산인나니 아니 니마송그리래야 야와rum치기 당한주 저에는 단 인군자래야 안 텐디테베기 까치야 반자 디케랑스 니버트 아니 수수 뒤즈텐진 아니 센로치스 만저는 데니 슈긴스 안 디슈츠에 젤래야 아니 니마니마야 안 텐디테베기 토니 아니 지 야와rum치 송샤교 참선을 마코가 소바다 참선을 도바용에 디칼들이야 도 아니 도바 슈사메반자 안 만저는데니 도바 나로치스 닝은 강시바디 아니 디 돈에 쉬어기 배수치기스로.
Since the direct antidote to the afflictions is wisdom that realizes reality, the way that things are, we need to develop the wisdom of reality, which is the main subject matter of chapter number 9 in this text, the chapter on wisdom. That is the main thing that we need to develop as an antidote to the afflictions, which is also the subject matter of the teachings that His Holiness the Dalai Lama is going to give in the following 3 days. So teaching will begin today at 1:30 afternoon, Chenrezig Institute time. So the teachings will be given over 3 days. Geshe encourages us to listen to those teachings, to tune in, because His Holiness is going to teach the main antidote that is to be developed. So it is a crucial topic. Now, since the teachings are going to go over a few days, Geshe also encourages us to listen to the teachings and also to keep in mind the doubts and the questions that we have, things that are not very clear to us in what His Holiness says. We can bring it up to in Geshe's sessions, and Geshe will try to clarify those points as much as he can. So we're going to also try to incorporate those teachings into what we do here in the next few days.
아니 직강 우연의 수지어서 덴바티 아니 토라야 상당토바이나 아니 님몸이 님볼이야 배바다 되는지 님몸이 님볼이야 배바다 차기도 왔으라 디차기도스.
So as we said, the root of the afflictions is ignorance, confusion. What antidotes them is wisdom with respect to reality, the way that things exist, the mode of abidance. So if we think of whatever that reality might be, we think of reality, the way that that phenomena exist, that is tantamount to being diligent about the antidote to the afflictions.
다치 차단 모성기 베 샤원도 교회 갑들이야 안치 강나오디 다가랑 뎀바진 드로바이나 테네 페시 농출지마도 베기 모연네스 지리야 아니 드로트에 카고 슈차고로스 딘자 랑라야 강나오디 나와터 셴마데바 텔라야 제바치친 드로바이나 아니 네부 토투야기 고급이어왔으라 안 디셔려야 아니 치소사트자 비기다 아니 차스야 멘다사야 되니지 아니 생아사야로 소모초 피야로 소모티타 제디 아니 니루 테코노니 토비기 아니 셰르기야기 아니 갸빙츠 소농 소세 Tiredo asra.
So Geshe said that in his mind is still under the control of anger, attachment, and ignorance, which means that if he still adheres to the way that things appear to his mind as truly existent and adheres to them as being true for that long, his mind will be solely mistaken. So things appear to us in a certain way. They appear to us as if they exist truly. And if we assent to those appearances, that would be solely mistaken. There is no way that assenting to those appearances will become reality, will become what is real or the mode of abidance. So things do not exist in the way that they appear. And this is what we want to investigate. This is what we want to think of in order to develop wisdom that realizes reality. And together with that, we also accumulate the collections. We purify negativities and obscurations. We do certain activities like prostrations, circumambulations, recitations of certain things. And all of those different activities are building up the accumulation of merit as a support for the development of wisdom that realizes reality.
Tirda zavinamolaya tedi nyumu shombala tadu chimi doba chas. Tinzida nganzu kiawa tomambewane gomde nyumu di 이게 남들이야 지 팬다 뉴 토라 상담바이나니 아니 뉴 바시마도 안 팬바 총세게 메바디 다 무여레스 진짜 다디 숑비체도 카드 이나다 지 이용사마리 삼비기 아니 다니엘 니베 레로 즈비다 지 아니 쳇도 그 삼바디 뒤 남의 지기요 말레스 로 대대니 무숑벌로 따도 침도 버차스.
Then being the case, let's look at the text. So first off, it says, therefore, I shall never reverse from destroying the afflictions, in the sense that I will never turn my back on destroying the afflictions. One should hold on to it and meet them in war with a vengeance, which means that we should never give up on applying antidotes to our afflictions, on meeting them in battle. We should not underestimate our ability to do that. We shouldn't be lazy, in a sense that we shouldn't develop the laziness of looking down on ourselves, laziness of discouragement. In no way we should give way to that sense of laziness that undermines our capacity to meet our afflictions in battle.
Lindilla dagi shen chashi kondusonu yultil tese ra dindigi kaso taji kyo tomomiwan tanda bardo ani ji never bashi chedengi ani nyumba dilla wonegi taji ani kunzin chena ani shen sona songosa deres dilla ya kunzin chichini ani di yulmi tegores yulmi tesna tandichi rangi samay nede tinipi ani pete pa yugoya di da nenga zodres tichigores ra.
So when it says, since this is the case, I should never withdraw from vanquishing the afflictions, that's the other translation, the FMT translation. Geshe emphasized the following two lines: I shall adhere to this, and resenting them, I shall meet them in battle. What we will resent is our own afflictive states of mind. This is what we're taking into the battlefield. We're taking up, or we are taking on our afflictions. We want to fight them. We want to meet them in battle.
Pangbar ba tedawe na nimun shumbala tuitaw samjur kanya chirmudaw chawo nimun nimbun delas sandela said nimbol sujana ra yasruji jana was ra nimbol sujana nimbotelaya ani gawa de shembachi and Nimulaya, Kundu Sonchini, and Nibo Titogi, and Nimutita, and Nenipa, and Yonchina, the Chiguris.
Yetsutamarinchin in his commentary says, since they are suitable to be abandoned, one should never reverse from the thought and action of abandoning them, which means that one should never turn their back to the antidote, becoming enthused about the antidote, becoming diligent about applying antidotes to our afflictions. So one should never give up on this antidote.
Repanya la Chadang Tang, Panja la Kunduzumani, Numu in the Pamba Jurushenas, Ta, and Numu Nimbulaya, and Shen Kaso, that Shencha the Masuna, and Gao Shuchin, and Chedia Tedan, and Numulaya, Kund that they were deep, and Numu Vicho Marives, Deepango Marives said, the Tohong Sudrojit.
One should hold on to the antidote and destroy the afflictions by meeting them in battle with a vengeance. So then an argument comes up. It says that which is to be abandoned and the antidote are attachment and anger. And revenge for that to be abandoned is an affliction and therefore to be abandoned too. So the argument that one might come up with is saying that looking at what we want to abandon, what we want to eliminate. What we want to eliminate is our own afflictions, anger, attachment, and so forth. That strong sense of craving, some strong sense of conceiving, and so forth. So if we develop resentment towards the affliction, isn't it resentment in itself an affliction? So in developing the antidote, we develop an antidote that is involved with resentment to the afflictions. So isn't that resentment to the affliction is an affliction in itself?
Hadi disungorda pangja nimulaya dangbati pangja nimulaya magawati ro dangbasna magawati ani Shedam Marves, the Pansha Marves, and Nimbu Penadamit of Lolaya, and Gawaki, Chavasanandra, Gawadi, any Chadang Chomarves, Tinza, any D, any Numu Pango Vananshi, Tia Pango Marves, to Castle Tamana, or Dinizila with us.
Just to make the question a little bit clearer, if we develop a sense of dislike to the afflictions, if we develop a sense of resentment to the affliction, isn't it that dislike, that sense of resentment, is in actual fact anger or hatred? And if it is anger or hatred, isn't it something to be abandoned? Isn't it an affliction in itself? If you develop a sense of affinity with the antidote, you like the antidote to the afflictions, isn't it that liking something is also attachment, and therefore that is also to be abandoned?
That's why now land or do number 10 new jumje matosos. T and the pansha in maris, the new jumje constogre modo, new constogin dogmatas, or the lavada.
That is the argument, and the answer to that is given in the last two lines in verse 43. Afflictions with such an appearance are the destroyer of afflictions, nothing else. This is the way that Shantideva concludes it. There are those things that we use in order to destroy the afflictions. They are not afflictions in themselves. They are the destroyers of the afflictions, nothing else.
Ranganzu Nimula Kondo Setuvina, the Yashi Chagordini, and Nimula Kondo Satuga Maras. Nimula Kondo Savana, Nimula Ken Tony, Kondo Sagor Yonden Tony, and a leg recharge Tony, Kondo Sadi, Dinaya Maras. These are Manzu Nimula Ken Tony, 콘도 사이지 존다 약슈르데 디오마리스 이내야 개지 뉴물에 끼얹을 때는 텔레마가 시워디 아니 뉴문기 님비 초르마도디 뉴문기 초싸우니 말이스 다든도 다음에 또 쉐럴이야 가와다 차발로 서버 베트 셈 차고요나 그디 고야지를 왔어 대한 다음에 또 쉐럴다 간지 님비 초르마도디 뉴문기 초스 저 말이스
Anger towards the affliction is an excellent thing. In that in order to resent the afflictions, you need to see the faults of the afflictions. And when you see the faults of the afflictions, you resent them. It's not that you're going to resent the afflictions through seeing the good qualities, but it's not that we start to resent the afflictions in thinking that there's something good about the afflictions. So we need to see the faults of the afflictions so that we'll come to resent them, but also it seems that in most cases, we don't even see the faults of our afflictions. So if you see the faults of the affliction, that is excellent. If you resent the afflictions by seeing the faults, that's excellent. If you also develop a sense of joy in wisdom that realizes selflessness, if you develop attachment to wisdom realizing selflessness, that's a good thing. It's not a negative thing. It is on the side of the antidotes. It is not on the side of the afflictions. It is not classified as an affliction. It is classified as an antidote.
만줄라야 네버 집이 찬다 네제도 통이 콘로사고라스 네제 응마디 뉴무들의 마도 뉴무께서 율디 자원인 차고 말은 된장 먼저 뒤견대기 콘로사사디 노드고 여바디 단단 디톤다 세우진 된거라서 먼저 콘로 컨셉디 콘로사사 노드고 여바다 세우슈즈레서 먼저 뉴무 콘로 마사지 뉴무사사 율라야 아니 카산 데라 콘로사자 디 마리기 온기 아니 콘로사자 노르바리스 라
So we need to be angry with anger or with the afflictions. We need to resent the afflictions because the afflictions are harming us. So from the viewpoint of being harm doers, we do need to resent the afflictions. And therefore it is appropriate to resent them. But often what we do is rather than resenting the afflictions, we resent the object of the afflictions. Like, for example, rather than resenting anger, we get angry with the object of anger. The thing that directly harms us are the afflictions. Of course, others can act as certain conditions for whatever situation we experience. It's not to disregard the fact that others act as conditions for a certain situation, and yet the thing that harms us directly are the antidote, are the afflictions.
nimbola shembadang zawen kasen dewe nimbola shembadang panjala khundun zumba number 10 dewe nyumun batan hawanis nyumun jomba chibi nimbi cho yembe panjar ma toso jewal chi ten shon jomja shebane panja sebana pani yute mugubi tendos.
So we read through the argument. Let's look at the way that the argument is addressed. Holding on to the antidote and the anger at that which is to be abandoned appear like afflictions, but actually belong to the side of the antidote that destroys the afflictions. They are not contained in that to be abandoned. In later commentaries, they are referred to as something to be abandoned. But then we talk about the meeting in battle of that to be abandoned, and the antidote becomes redundant.
Geshe land to serve tango sare. Kansana nyumu la magabi lodi shadang tawadi kondro tawadi pangsha mares. Kansana telaya mixegi nimbo teni and you'll take away your mares. Kansana pangsha nyumu sep nimbo togi pangsha nyumu se ondi and nyumu la magabi lodi and taran yedo matoro.
Bishop is that it still needs to be made slightly clear. So a dislike to the afflictions is not an object to be abandoned. Resenting the afflictions is not an object of abandonment. So when you meet the afflictions in battle and you apply an antidote to them, dislike to the afflictions will dissipate when the afflictions will go away. So you could say that the dislike will go on its own accord without needing to apply an antidote to the dislike of the afflictions. And therefore, the dislike to the afflictions is not an object of abandonment.
Jawo di khona res labdi digi ani pena ta nyumunda ani maga lo tianchi panja membro samsung rochi nimbo dame to be shero lo soba chanju sem lo soba la ya chi shuji be gan puni ta chi sempa chaya dia chi ani chakba membro samsung dem moro aj membro samsung ki nam to yoba na di ani zawnin tin maris ro ku sibu so go chi So
we have a strong reference here to reasserting or to reaffirming that resenting the affliction is not an object to be abandoned. It's not an affliction in itself. So anger, attachment, and ignorance are solely or exclusively objects of abandonment. If you think that being the case, maybe resenting the afflictions is an affliction. Maybe it is also an object of abandonment. But not only that, also developing a great affinity towards love and compassion, the mind of enlightenment, really liking those states of mind is also to be abandoned because it is attachment. So in order to disprove that these are objects of abandonment, that these are afflictions that are to be eliminated, Shantideva makes that point here, that resenting the afflictions, and also Geshe added to that, liking the class of the antidote, wisdom that realizes selflessness and so forth, these are not afflictions, these are not to be abandoned.
Do Namias, new movie on the Mugawalaya, Bever Chawanis, two Namiata, new movie Shawanti, Matsuba Cheko, Nengari, Sungordra.
Let's look at the next point in the outline. One should make efforts so that one does not come under the power of the afflictions in any time. Never should one submit to the afflictions.
The new movie Shawan, the Tsutsana, new movie Shawan, that's a dang new movie Shawan, the Tsudeola, that's any Shadan Taboda, and it's Chava Tabo, and it Dawan Tabola Soba, Tinti, Shawan, the Tsuvaina, Tene, and Magibaj Matobegi, and the Tati was that he was Zawanita, Zawanini, send that Zamase, and it Gawa Jata Mambo, Jilaya, and it called. Dungar Bashigina, Nelia, Negoyagi, and Jichard Waras, Tinza, and in human wish Hawandi, Zawani Matso Chigores.
Never should one submit to the afflictions. So we sometimes experience strong anger, strong attachment, very fierce anger or very fierce hatred. Those states of mind bring only unhappiness. They never cause us happiness. They never create situations in which things work perfectly or right for us. They only bring us suffering. Not only they bring us suffering in this life, also they connect us with unhappy states, with suffering in future lifetimes.
단 유문비 샤원디 문규와 체발이야 개와 토마메바니 콘데바 인자 깔카고 슈치로 먼저 대한까지 둘이 마음 땡치니 아니 깔레 마게나 레타고 지기 토네 유문비 샤원디 마규와지래야 아니 제투 메바 인자 딱까지 둘이 마음 까 자타 마음볼이야 아니 까지 둘이 땡고 인자 that delays 로 뉴무 뽕와래야 동하 자타 타이비 뉴무지 지수 타원니바 타원니 레바 마이노 시나스 딱 가시 딘디삼 초르다 뉴무 빵발이야 딱 깔 슈갸고다스 텔리코 아니 뉴무 코라마마 땡데나 아니 키보 마르베스 레타 마르베스 라바이너스.
We've been so accustomed to our afflictive states of mind since some without beginning and up until now that overcoming them is going to be difficult. We're going to have to go through a lot of hardship. We have to be so diligent in applying the antidotes to the afflictions. And not only that, due to our strong familiarity with that, we will have to do it over many eons. That being the case, that being so hard, wouldn't it be better just to submit to the afflictions? Isn't it that you'll feel much more comfortable if you just submit to the afflictions? And this is what Geshe Rinchen brings up in studying his explanation of the next verse. It says in the query, is it not better to follow the afflictions, since to abandon the afflictions brings hundreds of suffering with it?
다디 가서다지 아니 깨원디 점 센디 점기지 센드난기 데두기 자샤 점마도 만통와이나 디디지 셈레야 키시기로스로 마도지 깨원이 깨워 준치니 아니 드로고야지다 대한 깨원이 깨워 준여기 아니 깨워디 다디기 아니 레 게디키 빵랑게 제수 드로고와 지려야 니바니 딩이 짐바이나 안 자와니니 테니 도르사메규치 신디 테려야 간드지기 토니 깔레게고 존네야 아니 미모미 샤운드 마키와 제 깔리디 아니 베디타 아니 레바이마지 통투기어라스 당난주 통마투게디 그라 텔레코 차단기 샤운드 교치니 그 제수 주데바이나 지 세바당 기비소를 통대야디 아니 다 몸비왕기 그라 간진 돌드나 아니 몸바시 기샤원도 줄디비기 안 땅신 다 세우지 차고서레스.
It is possible that we think like that because of only submitting to appearances that done to us in this life, to the affairs of this life. So when we think of how much hardship is required in order to overcome the afflictions in the application of the antidote, we might think that that is too much if we only consider this lifetime. But then when we consider our passage from life to life, from birth to birth, and how we experience a variety of suffering under the force of karma, some of it is to be taken up and some of it is to be cast aside, then we see how it is actually worthy. It is totally suitable to make effort in the application to the antidotes, to the afflictions. When we compare the hardship in this life with what we will experience because of our karma in many lifetimes to come, it is totally incomparable. It is totally incomparable. It is much more worthwhile to work hard, to be diligent in the application of antidotes. But we don't see that, do we? we don't see that, and we still think that applying antidotes to the affliction is too hard. It is too difficult. We don't see that because of our ignorance, because of confusion.
Tindi yujimaresra manju nyumumalaya kazu siki kyenta tubada nimbo gon tuwa di tsugi ani semlaya ani shidi ra semlaya pakbebu yongya di peshi yaji yadamares ta liu toni kaje duri chiondi ani ko zawi liu kora dunga ko ranshirila ani di toni anchi dunga mambu yongdi yaji
It is possible that in the application of antidotes to our afflictions, we will experience manifold suffering, many types of suffering. It is possible, but it is likely that there will be solely physical suffering rather than mental suffering. For when you do apply antidotes to the afflictions, those antidotes to the afflictions should bring about happy states of mind. They will bring about states of mind in which you feel some respite from the affliction. You will experience a mind that is more vast and spacious and more at ease. So it is possible that being diligent about applying antidotes to the affliction will cause you some suffering, but it is likely to be physical suffering. And we take into consideration in that regard that this body is by nature a body of suffering. So it will happen, it will come to pass that we will experience suffering on a physical level.
I just, it's the psychological point that you're making in the application of applying such a harsh emotion, which can be described as an affliction, such as anger, I think is very tricky and could lead to somebody killing themselves.
You mean anger towards the affliction could be tricky and it could lead to someone killing themselves? Is what you're saying?
Because, you know, I mean, unless you have an understanding of wisdom, you know, which, you know, none of us here do, and let alone people who aren't here, you know, the normal person, if you allow them, if you encourage this antidote of being angry with their anger or other things, it could lead, you know, could lead to going inwards and somebody committing suicide. I mean, how would you? It's a very. I'm concerned that it's been
too much.
Yeah.
All right. Kurandila kondo sawaina Kuran samna nyanga tsawa shiyo resa. Kansana mika shi di kondo satan di yabo gomo tsuwaina. Ni soso sem bet trune ranshigya gi nyanga yo resa. Ni di kondo sawaina di la yan misegi sherab kego resa. Hala ngaso tende sherab dende tanda padu keyo samaresa. Kesi ngaso diwala den ngaso sherab dende makena. Peshe chilola den konso pasha. Peshe ketu samaresa. Chisan kon di nyoman la kondo sawai na magao den shichimbo kiawai na peshe nyanga tsawo shiwo re tungi dosa.
Kandachi nyinga tsago kandachi da kongro la kyuni magawa chawandi ani jikpares nganzu namgyu kongro sawa nanshin jik kongro la ya kyuni magawa chawandi nganzu meji la kongro sawa ni miti tsawa nini tong mando ya jita miti da kadar uji la ya deyagi deba la ya chiki 디용구면들스 라 디난싱기 컨트롤라 마가와 기온디 컨트롤라 지 남기가 컨트롤라 컨트롤 사야디 남기고 컨트롤 난싱 지기 and same true di yungu mares ro country kyun tondi ani zawni ni ta di chi maron ajta ani mandri waji yimba di sorondi so shu chago leon ya chi di tone shagor ma namgyu ngazu country san same true draje di te yungu yi mares di yi mares di.
Well, Geshe is wondering whether resenting anger, it can indeed lead to the scenario, the state that you described. For Geshe says that in general, when you look at anger and what happens when you become angry with another person. So suppose that you become angry with that person. Anger wants you to stay away from that person. Kind of it creates a gap or distance between you and that person. So then thinking of becoming angry with the afflictions, then you want to stay away from the afflictions. Now, this is the meaning of resenting your afflictions. You want to keep your distance from your afflictions. So normally when we think of anger, we think of a state of mind that is so intense in which your mind becomes not only confused, but totally out of control. But then resenting the affliction is not like that. It's not a state in which you become out of control and you become completely confused. It is more like you see the faults in the afflictions. And when you see the faults in the afflictions, you want to keep a distance from the afflictions.
So I think using a word such as diligence and enthusiasm far better than saying, being angry. Yeah, I think it's the language. I don't like the language.
지선데 쿠란 갑딜라 베시탐베 칙텐서라 덴데 쿠란 토바사데기여사 간세나 냠볼라 가와 케네 야마나 베춘체네 덴데 라와이나 야워치그레사 냐모나 마가와 퀸진 딜라서 라와이나 덴데 쿠란 데모 민도사
Sorry. 이내야 아주 콘드라야 콘드 사야라 아담 콘드 문진 치고 그러스. 콘드 문진 치온데 아니 콘드 아주 콘드 문진 마투니. 라 콘드 디 콘드 요 문진 마투니 아니 딱 콘드 샤원디 켜져 걸었으라. 콘드도 콘드 문진 투바이나 땡땡 콘드 디 슈촌 드라지마도 콘드디 슈체 드라지 용거서 말했어. 진짜 콘드라 콘드 사발라 토몬 콘드 문진 체고 그러서 디치디 딱 간지 콘드라야 마가벨로티 콘드라 콘드스나 콘드라 마가벨로티 어디리 딘디지 순고레스라.
So we speak about being angry with anger, for example. To be angry with anger, first of all, we need to identify precisely what anger is. So we need to be able to identify, to recognize anger, so that we'll be able to see the faults of anger and thereby develop a sense of dislike to anger. So when we find it a bit off-putting to become angry with anger or to resent anger, Geshe reckons that the full implication of anger, the precise identification of anger and all the disadvantages of anger might not be very clear in our mind.
Re dan sedi sigdi sengyurtam dagingo cheyen lai nambakundu nyumbe dalandoba mishawos.
Let's look at verse 44. It says, I would rather be burned and killed and even have my head cut off than to ever bow down to the enemy that is the afflictions in any way.
Tereda tagareta danes mer sigdi sebangyur tam dagingo cheyen layes ro tan layes tini sebdi lu torazam selas nyawal sobe domachimbu kechen deden töbe kek chebala nambakundu nyomube dandubati ti onu jo michawos.
Geshe Rinchen says in his commentary, regardless of whether one dies by being burnt or whether one is decapitated, it is still easy because at that time, one is only separated from life. Rather than saying it is easy, you can say it is better because at that time, one is only separated from life. But one should never submit to the enemy of the afflictions that cause us to take birth in the lower realms and is an obstacle to attaining our wishes. We should never fall under their control.
Tere tapena nganzuge nyumungaya chokchi nyingmare slabayna and gachi gyatang barawasra nyumulaya ga nyingmare slana digdo asra nyumulaya ani chomro nyumulaya gamro nyumudi pe masibata dugja yimbachi dugja rislana ani semlaya Mateva Yomaras. Then any Nimula Magawa Chigoris Lavaina, Tagara, Nimudi, Gawasag Yulmanza, Nimula Magawachi, Webajredos. Is that Nimula and Controsa na Digris Lavaina? Webadros Remendesra.
So now, going back to the point that you made, Dechin, when you think of anger, then saying that you shouldn't, or this is not something to be liked. Our afflictions are not something that we should like. Don't have a sense of affinity to your afflictions. Don't have a sense of affinity or don't like your afflictions because our afflictions are so bad. They are so negative. If you say it like that, don't have an affinity towards the affliction, it makes sense, doesn't it? So then if we say that rather than saying don't have a sense of affinity to the afflictions, if you say dislike the affliction, dislike the afflictions or resent the afflictions, Geshe is a sensible thing to say because they're so bad, because they are so negative.
Tere Diza, the Numumbi, Numumbi, Shaman Cubanata, Ningachum Shuch Tinza, Numulaya Kabdi Lenche, Numulaya Kabdi Lanche, and Suzuki, Save Tongo Chomba inaya, and Benatachi, Kalala Soba, and Gola Soba Pe, and Chego Chomba inaya, and Lud Torasam Rematobe, Yavachimalaya Digi, and Pemba Mado, never see Yomaras. The Numumbi, any Dalia, and Chosombaina, and Kiava, and Ser Tamjalia, and Suzu Dungaganella Jordiach, younger was Tinza, Tunamia, Numubitalia, and Durungumaris.
So here Shantideva says, do not submit to the afflictions. Don't allow yourself to come under the control of the afflictions, even if it's at the risk of your own life, even if your limbs are going to be cut off, even if your head is going to be cut off, do not submit to the afflictions because there is no benefit in doing that. If you oppose your afflictions, if you see your afflictions as enemies, then you might experience some hardship in this life, but the benefit that you will get from that in future lifetime would be immense. Whereas if you submit to the afflictions, not only they will harm you in this life, but they will also continue to harm you in future lifetimes, for many future lifetimes.
Dan Messi the 7 year long go in like Cindy, you taught some new also doing KGV Namoko New John to a tea on and Michawos.
Geshe read again through these two paragraphs. Regardless of whether one dies by being burnt or whether one is decapitated, it is better because at that time one is only separated from life. But one should never submit to the enemy of the afflictions that causes us to take birth in the lower realms and is an obstacle to attaining our wishes. We should never fall under their control.
Terda ani tam beba jata tumi koni ani beba chini nyumumbi gudati ani pambaina pan nugu rebes ra pan nugu rebe es lavena ta pan nugu res pamba yores ra bebe pana pan nugu ni to gombala sums rangi nyumu tsawa ni chona terni bi teme batang gyushijulo ni chona tsoba tena pon nugu batang tsawa ni chona terni bi ten kaya mechi pon rigos.
So then you might wonder, if I make effort in abandoning the afflictions, is it possible to do it? Can I abandon the afflictions? To this, let's look at, first of all, the next point in the outline. Cultivating the joy that it is possible to abandon the afflictions if effort is made. So if you become diligent, you'll be able to abandon your afflictions. There are 3 points in that section. The first is, if the afflictions in your own continuum are completely uprooted, there is no place supportive of them in your mind. Then, as the cause of the afflictions arises from error, if one applies diligence, one will be able to abandon them. Then, if they are completely uprooted, there is absolutely no place that supports their existence, and thus it is reasonable to say that they can be abandoned.
Re tambun ta rangi gi nyumu tsawa ni choma ta nyumu mi tsawa ta mariba de cheba tsawa de cheba ko ni ani pa yuba ni yuba ina tene soni ta ani nyumu di nebi gi ten meba chawa inza nyumu di tsawa ni ani laye kewa meba chi yonya meba chi ani chado waras yores ro rangi gi tile pa ani pizza vi jela ya ani yul shen jela ya sonchi ni tamang dawa nanshinki ani saja shenjilaya sonchini yang khunjini korajeni yongde tindi tsawni yomares chikpi tsajila pi warares ro yomares ngota temebanes kadi nyumu lenchi neni chonya jigden bi dadar nibanye bata laya nebachibi tedan tumba chari sena tama dawa yuni chonya ni yujen tadu neshi yonsoni nibateni tenye chidoki nyumu datsu tedan ramayins.
The first point in that section is, if the afflictions in your own continuum are completely uprooted, there is no place supportive of them in your mind. So here Shantideva says that you need to expel the afflictions. You need to kick them out. So if you uproot your afflictions, if you kick them out, there is no place that they can reside in your mind. And therefore, if there is no place that they can still reside in, they will not be produced again. They will not arise again. So it is unlike another enemy. Physical enemy, you might chase away, but there's always a danger that they will take arms and again rise up against you, that they will return. Afflictions are not like that, because once they are uprooted, once they're expelled, since they have lost their residence, since they've lost the support, they will never be able to rise again. So looking at Geshe Dhammarinpoche's commentary, it begins with, first of all, formulating someone else's position. Afflictions are like worldly enemies in that, having been expelled from one's place, they find again strength and harm again. So it is appropriate to treat them likewise. To that, Shantideva answers, when the ordinary enemy gets expelled from one place, they conquer another place and remain there. Having regained strength, they return. The way of the enemy of the afflictions is not like that.
Nibatenshi tomini tene nolin javi chedu chir doki nyumun bidar la sur tedan jawa mayin des 자원이 총나 젠도 네바야 매 네바니니 치도바야 미스 비체로스
So we said that Shantideva answered this querying, saying that the way of the enemy of the afflictions is not like that. It is not the same. When the ordinary enemy gets expelled from one place, they conquer another place, regain their strength there, and then return to take their revenge. The way of the enemy of the afflictions is not like that. Once they have been expelled from the root, they cannot remain in another place and they cannot return.
So, I mean, when anger is destroyed at the root with the wisdom, understanding, emptiness, you're so close to enlightenment, if not at enlightenment. And until then, you still have seeds. So often in our continuum, we move them around. We think, oh yes, I've subdued that. But then, it comes up again. So, it seems to me, I mean, it is good to have anger towards them, but it's more of an attitude than a behavior. And so that's yeah. So I think it's more of an attitude than a behavior, and that the behavior is more about encouraging our what's the opposite to affliction? Oh.
What's this? Sorry.
And it's the antidote is more about encouraging more positive behaviours. So it's not about anger, annoyance is the attitude, but it's not the behaviour. The behaviour is the perfections.
So one more is saying she had every word Dechen said. That was from the previous bit. So I reckon that you've had it again. I changed the setting of the mic I increased the gain and also made it kind of fall susceptible to all directions. So hopefully you at home have had questions. So if you haven't, just signal and I'll try to repeat it. But anyway, Kurangi today Kuran Chiochik Tandwa, Kondra Kondra Sandi. Chizantito la Samotawaina. Ta Kondro Zawane Pangwaina, Zane Pangwaina, Peshe Tony Tonamato, Kondro John Tugimares. Ta Tony Towaina, Peshe Chanjuko Pan la Tan Nievo Chagresa. Yamena Sange Chatsaresa. Chazan Natsu Tandenetsu Tewaina, Peshe did Tarimbo Shueresa. She's a negabla che si controlla contro sawaina, tadila sambatan jorwa pesce yawa chego gresa. Sambala pesce contro la magawa, contro la contro sa. E ne chopa se di jorwa se di pesce chopa yagamato, dende chopa duga, dende cheyo maresa. So the kondo sawaina, that's so samba den the kondo yamana magad in the chanaya. Jova dila, jorwa dila, pesher patchin to the sherab something dila sopama, to shembache mares, kiran sanas.
Yahudus, Beahudus,
Yeah, that's a good way.
Very good.
That's a good way of thinking that.
Yeah. That Geshe Jolo Chong, Zombatena, Ponibanes, that Numudi Geshe Jolo Chong, Chigris, any Susun Bezun Chini, Tanda Ani Deching Sombanashi, Bezun Chini, Jeso Pashi Trulatin, any Zo Sheriff Dami, Sheriff any layer 10 in Jobaina, any Numudi, Zawani Pantuyaki. Netsujiris.
Next point is the cause of the afflictions arises from error. If one applies diligence, one will be able to abandon them. And just like Dechin said, if you practice the 6 perfections, particularly if you develop the perfection of wisdom realizing selflessness, you will be able to expel the afflictions from the root.
Re nyumu shara meki pang dai leser kandu drawal to kandu nene danu cheshivu lo shen dala zomba meba says.
Let's look at verse 46. Afflictions, when abandoned by the eye of wisdom and dispelled from my mind, where will you go? Where will you dwell and return to harm me? Although this is so weak-minded, I have been reduced to making no effort.
Terdali tambudi nyumu shara meki pang segi nyumu se di di twendi nyumu tambudi ani kaso tachi nimbo tena chom nibigi tachi chom niba kanji nyumu di tendu de tubi niba meba ani nimbachi kanji nume ani nyumu nyamchong set niba meba chi nimbachi dindi sungo res ta ani niba di nyumu sedi nyumu korangu ani rangyu mashiwar rangyu ani maturwa chingi chele chingi ani semjimba o disungore sonres ra.
So verse 46 in the other translation, in the translation that is found together with the commentary, says the deluded afflictions abandoned by the eye of wisdom, which when cleared from the mind, where will they go? So this translation misses the way that it is expressed in Tibetan, which is better translated in the FNT translation that says afflictions, right? So repeating the word afflictions twice. So in repeating these 2 words twice, we reflect upon our ability to destroy the afflictions. We have the ability to destroy the afflictions in a sense that first off, they will not be able to remain in our mind. They will lose their ability to harm us. They would be therefore rendered incapable of inflicting harm upon us. So we can think about it in the first repetition of the word affliction. With the second repetition of the word affliction, we can also then think of how when afflictions arise, they make the mind unserviceable, unsuitable. They bring about a sense of unpeacefulness in our mind.
Sel kandu drawanju kandu nene danu chishion lo shen dala zomba mewa ses kanji nganzu nimbo ani kanji mik sherab ki mik ani dame bigi en sherab la ya ten drawayina ko ani semgi karso tachi sari ki chadu sar drawayata ani nyumu bi chodi ani sedroyaji yungres inaya ani thandapad mayoedi pena ngata ulaya chi ani zamba shembi wangi bezu che matu wangi leli wangi ani chi da menda song tanya mangwi wangi ani lo tsi du mane bi wangi tini ani pang matu re mato ani pangyu meba dang seju meba chi tini zao in mares.
Once the afflictions have been abandoned from the root, they have no other base. Since the afflictions arise from the faulty root, one should strive to abandon them with the eye of wisdom that realizes emptiness. So afflictions are abandoned by the eye of wisdom. Wisdom that realizes selflessness, wisdom that realizes emptiness, wisdom that is that mere entity of clarity and cognition. So once you develop wisdom, once you develop clarity and cognition, you'd be able to abandon afflictions, to expel them from the root. But we haven't done it so far, have we? We haven't done it so far because we haven't made effort, or we haven't made an adequate effort in order to do that. We have been lazy. Our mind has been susceptible to different conceptions. It has become so discursive that it doesn't have the power to expel the afflictions from the root. But not having been able to do it so far because of what we've just said is not the same as saying that we are incapable of expelling the afflictions from the root. We can still do that. Even if we haven't done it so far, it doesn't mean to say that it is impossible to do that. It is possible.
nyumu nenchi tsawa ni choma nibi temi bi chere nyumu tsawa ni shinji lolu choma toni to bi chere ki miki sabam pambalan bebde pangshi daki la sani sadun jowa gyo tens gyo drawer gyur ten khandu neni niba niba tang dala niba chibi chere honte misi ki cheros nyumu di teda yina yang lo shenpa dala nenchi tsawa ni ndembi zomba mebi sebe never chevayinos.
As it says, once the afflictions have been abandoned from the root, they have no other base. Since the afflictions arise from the faulty root, one should strive to abandon them with the eye of wisdom that realizes emptiness. Once they are cleared, or what is called abandoned, from the mind, where will they go and find new strength to return and retaliate? It is impossible. Although it is like this, the weak mind does not let me strive to uproot them once and for all.
Tishajara. Tatsuba meba, zumba meba. Lelo yimbani, siwuris, tinza, shaja kosan karasa, yawaruji sonji nye, yakshiti inseres.
So let's leave it here for now. Now, as Geshe said just a minute ago, it's not that it is impossible to abandon the affliction. We haven't done it so far because of not making effort, because of being lazy, because of being susceptible to so many discursive conceptions that we haven't generated the power to abandon the afflictions. So taking that into consideration, let's submit to that and leave it here. Let's leave it here for now. We still have teaching with his honors at 1:30. So someone asked previously, Graham, I think, asked if we still have the afternoon activities. So we will not have an afternoon discussion. We'll still have a tute, but let's see what time his honors finishes his teachings. So the teaching is said to be 1 hour. So let's make sure that we have at least half an hour break. So
it says 1 hour, but also online it says 1:30 till 3. So
yeah,
on the website. So
okay.
There's a little bit of confusion.
So yeah, so the teachings are going to take 1 hour or 1.5 hours. It is not very clear. So let's say that after his honors finishes his teaching, we're going to have half an hour break. So let's say that probably, let's say for the time being that we'll start at 3:15 and then play it by ear.
I mean, he also could start early too. He has done that.
Yeah, he is also. Maybe someone should just SMS his honors and say that, hey, we have a tute afternoon. All right.
So we'll do the dedication.
All right, let's do the dedication in English. I quickly become bored of Buddha and lead it to never sensing daily pleasant life, and because of this the supreme jewel Bodhisattva, which is not a reason in life, and that which is a reason never diminished, but increased more and more. And encircled by snowy mountains, we are the source of all happiness and good. In residence in Gato, please remain until samsara ends. You are wholeness, endurance, moral, sustaining, preserving, and spirit. Who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers only in the three jewels, protect of myself.
For myself and others, your
Yes.
disciples, please live long. Many translations.
Sorry?
Just there was more translation.
Thank you.
Jesus.
Jesus keep touching people. Okay.
I asked for
Yes.
excellent. Really nice question.